Hello and welcome to another episode of The Frontline with Dr. Gary Payenda. I'm Gary, and I'm glad you can join me. If you like the kind of content that we've been bringing you on topics of health and medicine and politics and socially progressive ideas, and just basically the fundamental idea that we need a society and a government that looks after all New Zealanders um, and ensures that all of us prosper. If you like that idea and you want to see more of this kind of content, let me know, put it in the comments, and share this with your friends. You can also find my long form writing on Substack. If you just put in Gary Payenda, you ought to be able to find it on the Substack app. And that's where I get a chance to delve into a bit more detail on some of these topics and include a bit more background information. So today I'm going to bring you a talk that was filmed at Whangarei Labor Group's community conference. It was open to all, and we had several speakers. We're going to be profiling one today, Max Harris. And the topic of the conference was, how do socially progressive parties move forward given all the challenges that we're seeing going on right now politically and economically. And one of the speakers of the day was Max Harris. So Max is a barrister. He's a constitutional lawyer with a PhD in constitutional law from Oxford. So he's an academic, but he's also an author. In 2017, he wrote a book called The New Zealand Project. And in it, he talked about how government at the time seemed to have lost its way and how we needed a return to morals in government and in public policy. I think you could argue that now more than ever, the idea of morals in government is needed, and it's time for a return to a sort of people first approach to government. And so he wrote the book years ago. You can still find it on Bridget Williams' books. I just downloaded it. It's available on Amazon Kindle and Apple Books and Google Play. And it's well worth a read. I've just begun it a week ago. He, in the book, talked about this surge of individualism that he felt was happening in Aotearoa over the last 20 to 30 years, where politics was losing a sense of its moral direction. And he talked about cornerstone values like care, community, and creativity, as well as love, or aroha. And he's spent the years since then living this. So he also does work as a campaigner for Action Station, and has continued to speak publicly at forums like the one in Northland to groups of members of the public. He's very approachable, and I think you're going to enjoy the talk he gave. As always, if you have comments, leave them. I'll read them all. And yeah, appreciate your support and your viewership. And if you like this sort of thing, share it with a friend. All right, let's get to Max Harris now, telling us how socially progressive movements can thrive and grow in the current climate.
Tēnā koe Ed. Ko Max Harris tōku ingoa, he Pākehā ahau, he tangata tiriti ahau, e mahi ana au ki Tāmaki Makaurau, e noho ana au ki Tāmaki Makaurau, e noho ana au ki Onehunga. It's really nice to be here. My name is Max. I'm tangata tiriti, which just means that the reason that I'm in this country is te tiriti o Waitangi, no matter what this government tries to do to that constitutional foundation. And it's so awesome to see so many of you out. I'll try not to speak for too long because you've already listened so well and you want to probably get some food and get ready for the Warriors playing tonight. But I just wanted to say it's quite hard to get 60 people out in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, and so coming out on a Friday evening is awesome. I was going to talk a little bit about what's going on and why health is important and what we can do about it. But I just wanted to focus on that last part about the alternative, because we've had really good discussion so far about the problem, but I think we can win. We can win from the left, and I want to tease that out a little bit. But let me just touch on what's going on. This was really well covered by, in particular, Ed and Gary and Aniva, and we know about the catastrophic human misery that this government has caused, but I just want to underscore that, because some of the hurt and the harm that this government has caused to people on income support who face money management and the humiliation of having to show a card that indicates that they're poor, to people deeper in MSD debt because of this government, to people facing disability cuts because of this government. That human harm is almost beyond words, but I think we have to say it and we have to remind ourselves of it. But even beyond the human harm, in economic terms, on this government's own measures, this government is failing, right? So if you think about liquidations, company liquidations, if we want to measure ourselves against the government's own benchmarks, 2,500 liquidations in the last year, at the start of this year, hitting a high over the last 10 years. This government talks a lot about growth. Growth has been anemic. So since the end of 2022, if you look at each quarter of GDP growth, and I'm not one that thinks GDP should be central, but if you look at that measure, growth has been between negative 1% and 0.8%. So even on that measure, this government is failing. If you look around our cities, you all know this, right? If you look around where I live in Onehunga, you see the empty lots of state housing left empty without provision. This government says people don't care about delivery, but there are people suffering. People have been moved out of communities because of those empty lots. You see empty shops in high streets in Auckland and Rotorua and Wellington, and I'm sure here as well. You see empty futures, which Aniva talked about. So this economy is tanking, and it's breeding a society that is lonelier, that is more individualistic, that is less connected. We all know that. That's what's going on. But I also wanted to mention some positives around what's going on, because what's happened in the last couple of years is a stirring of power and energy outside of parliamentary politics that we shouldn't forget. Don't forget the movement led by Māori on the Treaty Principles Bill. 330,000 people. 330,000 people submitting, more than that, the March to Freedom in the US that's held up as a high point of civil rights globally, right? Huge number of people on that hikoi, huge number of people, including because of work in this room, by people in this room involved with Network Waitangi Whangarei. A huge number of people submitting on Regulatory Standards Bill, more people interested in public ownership. Something is stirring and something positive is stirring, and we should remember that as we think about the alternative and what we want to do next. But I just wanted to talk, before getting to the alternative, about why health is important. And I don't want to talk about numbers or statistics. I actually want to talk about my own experience, because I have an unusual health condition. When I was 26, I thought I was fine, relatively fine, apart from, having big ears and glasses and flat feet. But it turned out I fainted. I was overseas, and it turned out I have a connective tissue disorder, and I had to have open heart surgery. And that's led into a health journey over the last 10 years, which has involved lots of interactions with the public healthcare system. And the public healthcare system in this country has saved my life. So 2.5 years ago, I had to have open aortic surgery. I had an abdominal aortic aneurysm and got amazing care at Auckland City Hospital. And just this last week, I was I'm fine at the moment, and I'm hopefully going to be fine. But I was, and I feel very safe here. But just this last week, I was going into Green Lane in Auckland, and I was coming out, and I felt a surge of gratitude for the public healthcare system that we have, because I've had a huge amount of support from the public healthcare system. Every year, I have to get an MRI. I've had cardiac psychological assistance, which you get if you have serious cardiac surgery. I've had ECGs. I've had genetic counselling support. And a healthcare system could look at me with the challenges that I have, and it could write me off. It could say, this person's too difficult. But it doesn't do that, our public healthcare system. And that's the beautiful thing about our public healthcare system when it works right. And I know it's not perfect for everyone, and I'm going to come back to that, but when it works right, it doesn't look at you and say, because you can't pay, you're going to be turned away. It doesn't look at you and say, because you're too sick, you're going to be turned away. And I know it hasn't served Māori, as many state services have not served Māori well over the years, and I know that it's been underfunded and run into the ground, but I think that is a beautiful thing, and it is an island of care and community in a sea of profiteering that we shouldn't forget and that we need to hold on to. But as we know, it's at risk. It's been run into the ground, and we also have outsourcing and privatization already happening. So you might know about the outsourcing of contracts, not just from year to year, but for a 10-year period, this attempt to lock in privatization. And that's what's so dangerous about this government, right? Is they're not just doing all of these things, but they're trying to lock them in. And so ensuring that beyond this government's term, we have a permanently individualized, isolated society that is run for profit over people. And we also have private healthcare companies doing very well. There's some of the few parts of our economy that are doing very well. And the healthcare system just forms a part of a whole series of essential services that we know are costing too much. And I do want to say that things were not perfect before this government as well. And the problems run deeper. We have power prices surging, as Ed has written really well about. So in the last year, power prices up by 10.4%. We all know about the price of butter, up 120% over the last 10 years. And that's because, as this government is moving us towards, we've left too many things to the market. We've forgotten that some things are too important for the market. And we've left ourselves volatile to those essentials of life being provided by the market in a way that ends up being expensive, so that we have this horrible phrase, the cost of living, and we find ourselves in an almost permanent cost of living crisis. And that brings me to the alternative and what we need to do from here, because I do think there is a positive program that we can get behind. But I think we need to fight for it, and we need to be clear about what it is. So like Justine, I joined the Labour Party again about a year ago, and I'd done a lot of work with the Greens and also with Te Pāti Māori, and lots of work outside of parliamentary politics. So this was not an easy step for me, but for me, I do think that the state in this country is an important vehicle for taking on private economic power and the economic system that we have, and it's also a key vehicle for supporting constitutional transformation. And I don't think we can bypass the state in our analysis of what to do next. And to me, the most promising vehicle for working with that state or in and against that state is the Labour Party, and that's why I joined the Labour Party. And so this program is something that I think the Labour Party should be leading, but it's also something that all of us on the left should be taking. And when Justine and I did another event a little bit like this in Tamaki Makaurau, I was just scribbling before I got up on what the program might be. And I just wrote a few things down, and they added up to like a slightly cringe mnemonic, you know, those things that add up. But honestly, they all added up to the word uplift, U-P-L-I-F-T. And so I'm just going to run through them, and it's just a nice way to remember what I think a program could be. Because it's very important that we don't take half measures, as Gary said. It's very important that we think across the board about change, because one small step is not enough. And to me, we need to think about some of these changes together. So what is this cringy mnemonic? U spells universal. And I'm going to come back to Te Tiriti and how universalism needs to sit alongside honouring Te Tiriti. But I do think that we need to reclaim universalism as a value across the board, and that means free public services in that kāwanatanga sphere, right? So the best of our public services, our community libraries, our free education system, our mostly sometimes free public healthcare system, run on this principle, right? But we don't have universalism in so many other areas, in our welfare system, in our legal aid system. We have this demeaning means testing system, which requires people to prove that they're poor, which adds bureaucracy, which is stigmatizing, which locks so many people out, because so often the thresholds of how much savings you can have on your income are so low. So we need to reclaim that universal value. And Justine and I were involved with the Efessor Collins mayoral campaign in Auckland several years ago for the late Efessor Collins, an amazing figure. And he championed fares-free public transport. That's another example of something that is feasible and also popular. This is something we can win on, and I'm going to come back to that. P in the UP of uplift is public ownership. So we do need to talk about the problems of privatization and corporate power. We do not talk about that enough in this country. Not just the supermarkets, not just the banks, the corporate healthcare interests that are doing well, the corporate dental interests that are doing well. And I should have said free dental is obviously another example of universalism in action. But public ownership of dental, public ownership of energy is an important way we can bring those essential services back into some level of community control, some level of control of the prices and access to those essential services. The L in uplift is for Labour and the Labour movement. And whether you're in the Labour Party or not, I think that's got to be central to the future of this country, is working alongside unions, because that is the way that we build power in workplaces and that we build collective power. And I was at Justine's amazing event after the nurses and midwives strike on Wednesday, and what was so awesome to see in this Birkenhead Bowling Club drinks that Justine had organised, where we kind of pushed away the people at the side who'd otherwise were coming, was that unions were coming together in solidarity. So it wasn't just NZNO, but the Maritime Union showed up, and the Firefighters Union had been there earlier. And they said, you know, what you're going through in terms of shift work and in terms of lack of pay is the same as what we're going through. And we need workers supporting workers. And I understand workers in the broadest sense as those in paid and unpaid work. And that connects to the I, which is income support and welfare. I want to see the Labour Party stand up unflinchingly for welfare, and to stand up in an unafraid way for being the party of those who have been alienated by the system. It also stands for internationalism, and I think we've touched on this government cozying up to the US, turning its back on Palestinian statehood as a genocide occurs in Gaza, moving closer to AUKUS, this horrific agreement across which would take us closer to a Trump-led US. So internationalism is key to everything that we do, as well as income support. And income support covers a lot of things: removing sanctions, lifting benefits, eliminating MSD debt, ensuring we have better, more generous supplementary support, and a number of other things. And if you want to look at what can be done there, Fairer Future is a group within Action Station that has done great work on this. F is for funding. So obviously we need to talk about how we fund all of this, but it is fundable, right? We have the wealth in this country. It's not that we don't have the wealth, it's just not well distributed. And a wealth tax, in my view, is the best way to fund this. Capital gains tax is long overdue. There are many other parts of the tax system that could be made fairer. And we could also be talking about borrowing more, and I'll come back to that just briefly in a moment. But finally, T is for Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the foundation of this country. And alongside universalism, of course, we need separate supported services for Māori, so to uphold tino rangatiratanga under Article 2, and that should be hardwired into all policy thinking, so that when we're thinking about free dental, we're also thinking about tino rangatiratanga over oral health. When we're thinking about a Ministry of Green Works, we're also thinking about what does it mean for the government to provide resourcing for Māori infrastructure and housing, and whatever Māori determined to be priorities. That is just the baseline of the rights, the pre-existing rights that were guaranteed in Te Tiriti. So that is uplift. Those are some of the things. It doesn't even cover everything, but I think there is an interlocking logic to some of those commitments, and they're a program. Now, what could get in the way of that? First of all, being too quiet in opposition, and I think that's a real risk that the Labour Party faces. There's some talk about not wanting to bark at every passing car, but when you've got a blitzkrieg from the government, when you've got what the other speakers have talked about, that's just not going to cut it. Another risk is being too lacking in detail. So I do think health, homes and jobs are important priorities, but it's really important that there is a detailed program, and not just one policy, but a program. And thirdly and finally, there's a lot of a risk of being too willing to absorb the austerity logic that's dominant at the moment. And I do hear a worrying number of politicians on the left say, well, we just won't have a lot of money if we get into government. That's rubbish. New Zealand's government debt is very low compared to similarly situated countries. It's at about 42 to 43% of GDP. In the UK and the US, it's 100% of GDP. And yes, there was an increase after COVID from a very low base. So we need to make sure that we're educated on that, because we can borrow to set up the capital costs for a network of dental clinics. We can borrow for inter-regional passenger rail, and that can do a lot of the funding work. I totally support, how do we get there? And I'm just about to shut up. How do we win this? I totally support those healthcare for all remits that Justine talked about. And my vision would be that we have integrated community health centres that include free publicly owned dental clinics, public GP centres, pharmacists, blood tests services. We actually have a lot of these clusters in the private sector, and it makes no sense that we don't have that kind of integrated service in the public sector. So support those remits if you're in the Labour Party. Challenge people in conversation if you hear some of the myths and the nonsense that we've tried to push back on. Join groups, join political parties if you're willing, but if that's not for you, join campaign groups. There are lots of great campaign groups in this place, right? People like Network Waitangi Whangarei, lots of great local Palestine organising that is going on, and I know lots of organising across the board. We need better progressive institutions, including left media, including left economic think tanks, including other groups that can bring us together. That's a more medium-term goal. But I do think this election is winnable. I do think these ideas are popular. Public ownership is popular. 74% of people in New Zealand support free dental. 72% of people in New Zealand support free public transport. A wealth tax is supported by a majority. So there's no contradiction between being on the left, being bold and ambitious, and winning. The very last thing I'll say, just echoing what Aniva said, is Aniva spoke really beautifully, and what you said made me think that in the last few months, in the last couple of years, I've heard more people saying, not just I want to move to Australia, but shouldn't New Zealand become another state of Australia? And that makes me sad. It makes me sad because it makes me think that people think this country and community are unimportant. And so what we have to do is stand up for the importance of this place. And that's what I tried to do in that book that I worked on a few years ago called The New Zealand Project, is remembering the project of this country, which started in its current form with Te Tiriti o Waitangi and needs to continue at the next election when we vote these people out.